Glad to welcome you all here tonight for a psychological humanities and ethics lecture here at Georgetown University. We have a wonderful audience here in person and also a very large audience online. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being willing to be a part of tonight's conversation. Happy to have you here. My name is David Goodman. I'm a visitor as well on this beautiful Georgetown campus. And I'm a part of a group that's here for the next few days. And we're a group doing a project that's called Cura Psychologia. It's a John Templeton Foundation supported project. And we come together across 6 different Jesuit universities, philosophers, theologians, and psychologists to be something of a learning community together, playing with different ideas, thinking together about the human condition, human persons, suffering, potential, identity. And we've been meeting at several universities thus far, and we have a few more to go, and this is our Georgetown gathering. So this lecture tonight is something of a dual purpose. It's a psychological humanities and ethics lecture that's a part of a larger series, and also a part of this project. This will be kicking us off during our time here at Georgetown. So excited to be here and delighted to be on this campus. For me, the first time here. Grateful to our Georgetown colleagues and also Georgetown administration for supporting this and having us here. So thank you for that. When we got the topic of tonight's lecture, I immediately thought I need to get Mark Freeman to moderate and be our master of ceremonies. The reason for that is when I visited him at College of the Holy Cross, this is probably 6 or 7 years ago, I came to campus just thinking I was going to have coffee with him. And he drags me into one of his undergraduate courses there and makes me describe to the students the differences between Jung and Freud on how human experience is rendered, how dream interpretation should look like, and also how religious experience is understood between these 2 different thinkers. Mark plays in this space constantly. He loves working with William James, Simone Weil, Emmanuel Levinas. So the question of how do we have a psychology that maintains fidelity to human experience and how we think about religious experience in a way that maintains fidelity to human experience is something that Mark has taught me much about over the years and calls me to frequently. So I thought this would be really good to have him here. So Mark, thank you for being willing to serve this role tonight. He'll take it from here, introducing our panelists and our speaker, and we'll have a wonderful conversation ahead. Thank you again for being here.
Thanks for those kind words, David, and thanks for that fond memory. Yeah, that was interesting doing that for sure. So the main thing I'm going to be doing now is just introducing the speakers. Our main speaker for the night is Ariel Glucklich. Ariel received his master's and PhD at Harvard University. He's currently at Georgetown, where he offers courses in Hinduism, psychology of religion, and anthropology of religion. He's interested in a range of issues, including classical Indian law, Hindu myths and rituals, contemporary folk religion and magic in Benares, theory and methods in the study of religion, phenomenology, neuropsychology, and not least the evolutionary psychology of religious experience, assuming that's feasible. Perhaps we'll see. He is the author of numerous books. I had occasion to just do a little Googling in advance of this, and it's really quite remarkable array. They include Sacred Pain, Hurting the Body for the Sake of the Soul, The Strides of Vishnu, Hindu Culture and Historical Perspective, and Everyday Mysticism, a contemplative community at work in the desert. He's also researched the way that religious emotions are implicated in human self-destructiveness, and more recently, the role of religion in the promotion of pleasure and well-being, such as in his 2020 book, The Joy of Religion, Exploring the Nature of Pleasure in Religious Life. Currently, he is holding conversations on Gandhi-style nonviolence throughout the country in Native American reservations, retirement homes, churches, police stations, military bases, and other locations. And in addition to his position within the theology department, he serves as the director of the Doctor of Liberal Studies program in the School of Continuing Studies. So it is great to have you here. I do want to introduce the others first, so we have a sense of context. First is Frederick, if I can now, since we sat next to each other at dinner, Bud, Roof. He is an associate professor in the theology department at Georgetown. He too has a PhD from Harvard and MA from the University of Chicago. Yeah. And a BA in religion from Williams College. He is the author of 3 books: The Creation of Chaos, subtitled William James and the Stylistic Ordering of a Disorderly World, which I must say, as a James fan, I really look forward to reading. Entangled Voices, Genre and the Religious Construction of Self. And finally, Bewildered Travel, The Sacred Quest for Confusion. And lots of other stuff too. As the titles of the book suggest, his research interests are in religion and culture, William James, and he also has an interest in exploring postmodernism and religion. He is the past co-chair of the Pragmatism Group of the American Academy of Religions and currently serves as the director of undergraduate studies in Georgetown's Department of Theology and Religious Studies. And we also had occasion tonight to talk a bit about his new project, which sounds fascinating. He's working on a biography of a schizophrenic friend. So we will look forward to what that yields, for sure. And then we have second, following Bud, will be Kate Withy. Kate, who has extensively explored Martin Heidegger's work, joined Georgetown University's philosophy department in 2009 with a PhD from the University of Chicago. And unfortunately, we weren't there at the same time, so we didn't cross paths. And undergraduate degrees from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Her main focus is 20th century European philosophy as well as ancient Greek philosophy. Her research on Heidegger centers on his view of human beings as open to meaning yet vulnerable to disruptions, exploring our dependence on the world for our projects, and the existential crises that frequently ensue. Kate's books include Heidegger on Being Self-Concealing, as well as Heidegger on Being Uncanny. And alongside this work, Kate's work also addresses the climate crisis, emphasizing our profound connection to the earth. So thank you for that. And we also have Adam Green. Adam Green joined as Georgetown faculty in the fall of 2010 after receiving a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from Dartmouth and completing postdoctoral training at Yale. Adam is committed to exploring human creative intelligence, especially in understanding how neural processes undergird our best ideas. Adam's work includes research on the neuroscience of teaching and learning in real-world educational contexts, as well as research into endogenous neural mechanisms and exogenous neurostimulation that support creative relational reasoning. He is founder and current president of the Society for the Neuroscience of Creativity. It's great to learn more about your work, Adam. I really truthfully hadn't been aware of it. Years ago, some of my own work also explored creativity, focusing more on the cultural conditions that variously promote or impede it. So it's really nice to know about some of our shared interests and concerns. And that turns out to be the case across the board. So various though we may be, it turns out that there are some nice bridges here. In any event, without further ado, let's turn it over to Ariel, who will be speaking on non-reductive, I forget the exact title, you tell me, non-reductive accounts of religious experience. So Ariel Glucklich, thank you. Yeah.
Are you clapping for him or for me? Welcome, everybody. Buona arrivata for some of you. It's very nice to see you here. I first have to apologize for my voice. I'm not a smoker. I woke up on Monday morning with 99.8 fever. And if I were a believing Jew, I would have asked God, why now? Why me? And he would have said, because you're not a good Jew, something along those lines. But there it is. I got it from my wife. So I apologize for that. It's nice to see you all. None of the students here are my students. It wasn't an intentional oversight, but it's good to see students here as well. My presentation is not hyper-technical. It's not technical at all. And my style is going to be conversational. So I hope that that works out. And I have, what, 35 minutes or so? Okay. So I do need to see how I switch, I guess the arrows, right? Okay. So the subject is religious experience and psychology. I set this up to look like an antagonistic encounter between two discourses or two ways of seeing the world, and we'll see if it's possible at all to somehow bring them together. That's really what this talk is about. So after I got my PhD, I got a job at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where I lived for 2 years. And my daughter was born there, same hospital where my father was born in Mount Scopus. And I used to carry her in the city in one of those pouches. And I didn't live very far away from the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, the Kotel. Kotel in Hebrew means wall, and that's how it's known in Hebrew. So we used to go there. And of course, she was just an infant, but I was being voyeuristic. I didn't take this picture. It's much too intrusive, obviously. But I saw that a lot. And so I'm beginning with this. When you see this over and over again, and you're somebody like myself, somebody who specializes in religious studies, particularly Hinduism, but is interested in what it's like to be a bet. Interested in what is it like to be her. And even though she's Israeli and I'm Israeli by birth, no longer so, but still at the time I was there as an Israeli and I could not figure out what it was like to be her. Okay, you can see the notes that are placed in the Wailing Wall. People bring all kinds of notes with requests, prayers, you name it. The prayers that individuals engage in at the Western Wall are not set. Say Psalm 119 is probably the most common one, but you can make up your own prayer. So I could not know what it was like to be her. That was in the 80s. In the 90s, I moved to Varanasi, where I lived again for 2 years doing research. I found that a lot more exotic, but about a year into it, it was no longer exotic. So in the morning, I lived in a place called Asighat. Asighat is very close to the river, the Ganges. The Ganges in Varanasi is the most sacred place along the Ganges. And the reason for that is because it turns north. So what does that have to do with anything? If the river turns north in the city, when you enter the water from the city, you're facing east. You're facing the rising sun. This man, who by the way is not a Brahmin, okay? And how do I know he's not a Brahmin? Because he does not have the sacred thread, but that's not important. He's facing the rising sun, engaging in prayers. The prayers are to Surya, the sun, or possibly other Vedic gods. This is a very old kind of ritual. And I was also interested in what is it like to be him? Okay, so I know the prayer. I knew the prayer at the time. I forgot it, of course. And I went into the river at dawn, just like he is. This is slightly after dawn. And the water was cold, okay? And the fact that the water was cold was significant for me Because while the woman in Jerusalem is dressed more or less the way anybody in Jerusalem is dressed, this guy is almost completely naked and he's standing in cold water, and it's important for him to be in cold water, which means something. So there's something about this man's experience, religious experience, that is much more embodied than the woman at the wall. And to me, that was a clue. Later on, after my experience in Varanasi or Banaras, I came back to the United States. I started working on another subject altogether, where embodiment was at the very core of it. Pain. So I got interested in the subject of pain. The reason for it is complicated. If you read the book, the introduction to the book has a note as to why it started. I do have to confess that if you look at the book and it mentions a man there as a friend, it was actually my father. It began as a conversation with my father, who lost a leg in World War II, stepping on the mine, and suffered from phantom limb pain. And he was preoccupied with pain, as was I. So I started looking at these kinds of phenomena. So this is Easter pain in the Philippines. I'm sure you've all heard about these extreme practices of individuals who volunteer due to devotion or some other reason to be crucified. Now, you notice that there are ribbons supporting his arms, but nonetheless, the nails are there. There are nails driven into his hand. So in a sense, it's a kind of a mimicking of Christ, of Jesus on the cross, yes, but without as much of the damage. His body is being supported so it doesn't collapse due to his weight and do irreparable damage, but it's certainly painful. The government of the Philippines now has closed this off so that the tourist-based voyeurism associated with this has now diminished, but the act itself stands out. So what is it like to be him? Why does he do this? In what sense is this a religious experience rather than a pathological one? Is it both? How do we mediate between these two questions? So this is very extreme. Here's another example, not as extreme. So this is the celebration of Ashura at Karbala. That is to say, it's a Shiite performance. And I chose, especially from all the images that are available, I chose one that is not bloody. There are other images on the internet that are extremely bloody, with the self-whipping, sometimes with chains, all kinds of forms of extreme self-hurting. Okay, what is it like to be them? What exactly are they doing, and why are they doing it? What is the purpose, and what is the thing that is driving it? So how do you go about finding out? Well, one option is to ask them, but notice the question. The question is, why are they doing it? In order for us to understand the phenomenon and explain it, we ask first and foremost, why are they doing it? This is from a video that I would urge you all to watch. In fact, I would urge you to watch all the Richard Feynman videos on YouTube. Because first of all, you're never going to see or hear a Nobel Prize winner speaking in thick Brooklyn accent. That in and of itself is worth it. In this particular one, a man approaches him and asks him, what is it with magnets that either repel each other or draw each other? Why did it feel that way? And so Feynman says to him, why do you want to know? Okay, what exactly are you asking? So the man repeats the question, okay, and Feynman again says, who wants to know? What is the nature of the inquiry? According to Feynman, in this particular video, when somebody is asking why, there's always a frame of reference within which a truth inheres. There's a truth in the frame of reference. If there's no frame of reference, you keep asking why, why? And the example that he gives is of a woman who slips down and is taken to a hospital by her husband. But here's another example. So about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't remember exactly, I was living in New England. A woman in Maine was hanging up her laundry outside the house during hunting season, when a bullet struck her in the heart and she fell dead. A hunter must have mistaken the laundry that she was hanging with a white-tailed deer or something like that, and she died. So you ask, why did she die? And you say, well, what is the why she died? You can answer it by saying because of a hunter being careless, right? But you could also say why she died because of the damage to her heart. Or you could say why she died. It turns out that this being Maine in the fall, he went out for a drink before he went hunting. Okay. You can continue asking why over and over and over in a whole chain of causality, unless you decide what the framework is in which the question makes sense. In other words, what do you want to know? What do you really want to know? That's what this Feynman video is about. Okay. So why do the men in the Philippines drive nails into his hands? And why do the Shiites whip themselves in the back is the why. And what are the frames of reference then? So here are some of those frames of reference. I call them levels of analysis, but you can consider them frame of reference if you prefer. So at the top, the order is arbitrary. There's the discursive level or the discursive frame of reference. So ask the person who you're dealing with, why are you doing this? And he or she will say, I'm punishing myself for my sins. Okay, that's punishment. Or he might say, she might say, the pain is healing. Or they might say it's a test. It's a test of my faith. Okay, it's the pain itself is a test. Or I'm doing it out of devotion, displaying devotion. Or I'm imitating Christ. That's what they say. That's a frame of reference. Okay, that's a discursive level of what is going on. But the why continues. Okay, so the experience level, in other words, something somewhat more basic, fundamental than discourse, than words. The person who is crucifying himself has a goal, has a purpose. And the act that is painful either fulfills the goal or undermines the goal. If you work for the electric company and you fall off a ladder and you break your back and you live with chronic pain, that's telos destroyed. Your telos then is a meaningful life, a job, okay, painless existence. But if your telos is related to, say, healing, test, alchemy, whatever, I skipped alchemy before, then the purpose is actually built. You have the satisfaction of accomplishing a goal. That's what telos means, an end, the goal, yes? That's at the experience level. You're aware of it. You're aware of both of these things. Then there's the ego psychology. What happens here? As it turns out, systematic self-hurting has an effect on your sense of self, okay? It either strengthens it. For example, you run a marathon, which hurts, but you accomplish it. Your sense of identity, your sense of selfhood is strengthened by that, along with the telos. Okay. But if the act is, instead of, well, if you think of Christ on the cross, if you think of somebody who was voluntarily nailed to the cross, right, then the whole experience related to the self is entirely destructive. It undermines a sense of self, like in an Argentinian secret police a torture chamber from the 1970s. See, my references go back to the 70s. On the other hand, a new self can be constructed through the process of self-modulated hurting. Okay. Then there's social psychological level as well. Okay. So there's either shame involved or there's honor involved. The shame could be involved as in what is driving you to hurt yourself. So for example, you disgraced your family or your family disgraced the community. And there's something about this act of extraordinary display of selfless suffering. Okay, you restore the honor of, you eliminate the shame, you restore the honor of the family. Then there's neurocognitive, and these are just suggestions. These are e.g., for example. So input reduces output. What that means is there's a mechanism according to which if you hyperstimulate the nerve endings, there's a process that is cybernetic that reduces output, motor impulses, and so forth. And that can translate into phantom phenomena. So this is built on a neuropsychologist from McGill University, Ronald Melzack, when he explains why phantom pain phenomena exist. And the neuroanatomy involved, according to Melzack, is the neural matrix, which is a mapping, a neural mapping that has a certain function, the neural signature, and the neural signature is what produces the phantom phenomena. Okay, this is just, as I said, in EG. There's a lot more going on all of these levels. There's a lot that is more, a lot more that is going on. So this is a sample. And in fact, there's also developmental psychology, there's psychoanalysis, there's any number of psychological disciplines that you could add to this list in order to answer that why. So what do we do with all of these frames of references? Okay. How do we line them up? If we want a true picture of why this man is on the cross, how do we line them up? Who's in charge? I'm sorry, I got this image. I thought it would be a little humorous, you know, a bunch of men standing in suits. They're more or less equal. You say, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same. Let's take them all. Okay, we take them all, but in what order? Obviously, I'm fetishizing men in suits. So you take them sequentially, let's say, right? In what order? But each one is its own entity, and we're just lining them up, and we have to find an order in which we are organizing our answers in order to arrive at that final truth. Okay, so those were two options. One is they're all equal. You choose any one of them at any time. The other one is there's a certain sequence. You have to go in a certain order, but in what order? Then there's another alternative, okay? The babushka doll order. This is a technical term in psychopsychology, in neuropsychology, the babushka doll order, or nesting, okay? So what does that mean? It means that the levels are related to one another in particular ways, such as some of them represent a theoretical reduction of other ones and is therefore more basic. So for example, you could go back to 3 back and go to the neuroanatomy and decides this is the neuroanatomical The outside door is the neuroanatomical. Why? It's the most decisive. Without the neuroanatomy of pain, none of the other things exist. And then that very little one is what the man tells you on the cross if he's talking. But then somebody else would say, no, the big one is the one that you see. Therefore, it's the experiential one. It's the discursive one. That's the one you're conscious of. That's the one the participants are conscious of. Okay. And that little one is what the little man in the brain, the homunculus. Not exactly, but the neuroanatomical and neurofunctional level. Okay. Of course, religious scholars would tell you that the big one is empty. That the psychological ones don't really exist. What really exists, this is religion scholars, of course, and I'm making fun of them because I'm one of them. That all that there is in religious experience is the religious dimension. The claim, the intention, the consciousness is what constitutes religious experience. The biology of it, and this is increasingly biological, okay, could work just as well for weightlifting. Some guy who goes to the gym and does weightlifting, pumps iron, right, standing in the mirror and so forth and so on, is exactly the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 there, okay, do not lead to a religious experience. They lead to some kind of a narcissistic joy, okay? Therefore, what really counts is the big doll. Okay? So there's a disagreement there. Obviously, a very sharp disagreement as to which one is which, although in the philosophy of science, nesting insists on theoretical reduction in a way that does not really allow for the God in the machine type of considerations. So what do we do? I'm going to let you look at that for a minute. This is what I'm working with now. Religious systems, system theory. This diagram is taken from Richard Sosis, anthropologist at UConn. And what, first and foremost, it's kind of a cliche in religious studies that religions are systems, right? A lot of things are systems, but religion is a system as well. And by virtue of being a system, that means that the experience that is produced within and by the system shouldn't be understood in terms of one-on-one cause and effect, right? Instead, it's an emergent property of the system, that is to say, of the interaction between elements in the system. Let me just take my watch off just to make sure. What time did I start? Stop me if you want me to stop. Okay. And so you have to take all the elements in the system that are relevant to the outcome of the religious experience, which is produced by the system, and look at how it is that they are produced. So if you look, for example, up here, the physical, emotional, cognitive, psychological artifact, the shared ethos, cognitive schema, symbolic meaning, material culture. What exactly is the relationship between all of those things? Are they the men lined up in a row so that one comes after the other? No. What you get is these arrows, right? You have feedback and feed forward between as many elements as a researcher you're able to identify as pertinent to the functioning of the system. And so if you, let's say, just isolate one little part of the totality of the system and of examples of feedback and feed forward in the case of pain. So you have the valued idea. The valued idea could be, I want to be Christ-like, maybe, okay? And because of the idea, a mental ideological entity, you evaluate the pain as a positive experience. And because and that is to say, it leads towards a telos. And because the pain is positively evaluated, the nociception, the feeling of the pain, isn't so bad. It's tolerable. And because of that, you go back to the affirmation of the idea. In other words, it's really cyclical. It reaffirms the idea which you value. And then there are other elements. Where in the body are you inflicting the pain? What part of the body? That's symbolic. It's both symbolic and nociceptive. What is the instrument that you're using to hurt the body? What is your biography? All of these elements here give and take information, which is what a system is. A system is information, okay? In every direction, in any number of possible permutations, okay? And that's just a small part of what this was, like one little area of what that was. And so you've got to be able to isolate in the system those elements. Now, this is important. It doesn't matter whether the elements are physical objects, your body, and speaking of the body, whether it's a neurological fact or a material fact, whether it's your clothes or what you ate. In system theory understood as information, all things coexist on the same ontological level because they all act as information to produce the system's goal, which is what the affirmed idea is. So really, going back to the men lined up or in a row, the best way to look at it is networking. That is to say, instead of taking a neuroscientist, a historian of religion, philosopher, all those people engaging in different disciplines and having each one telling you, no, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. No, this is what's going on. Instead, together in networking, they expose the full complexity of the system that produces the religious experience in the case of pain. And by the way, the case of pain is one of the easiest cases. There are obviously a lot more complex examples of religious experience than pain. So what's the system with the self-crucifier, for example? So there's the church, the body and health, the training, socioeconomic background, guilt and honor, family, feelings, biography, motivation, worldview, expectations, the religious and moral, social, political, memory. All those things are part of what produces the experience that we're trying to understand. But not like this, not individual lines like that. Instead, you have to be able to draw as many feedback and feed forward loops in the totality of the system in order to see what is produced. And what is produced is that in the center, which we're trying to understand. So this is where I'm at now. When I wrote the book Sacred Pain, I wasn't into system theory yet. Even when I wrote the book about pleasure, I wasn't into system theory. I'm into system theory now, particularly cases of dissonance. So that was it. I do have to say that the book that I wrote about pleasure and religion was a lot more difficult to write. It reminds me of Wendy Doniger at the University of Chicago Once they put in a catalog at the University of Chicago that she was teaching a course on the Kama Sutra with a lab. Of course, there was no lab, but that's Wendy Doniger. So anyway, it was a lot harder to write a book about religion and pleasure than it was religious and pain, because pleasure is actually a lot more complex from the point of view of system. Thank you.
Maybe delve into those orienting points and maybe not. The first question was, you had raised the question yourself. So what do we do with all of these frames of reference? What do we do with all these levels of analysis? I mean, I would also ask this of religious experience, and I'd be curious to know where you stand on it. Maybe the others will ask something similar. To what extent might religious experiences transcend any and all accounts we might give of them, including system-related accounts? Oh. The first question I would pose is, to what extent might the kinds of experiences that Ariel was talking about transcend any and all accounts we might give? That's certainly one of the questions that William James asks in the very first chapter of the Varieties, called Religion and Neurology. Second, you use the language of produced. And that's a different kind of language indeed than the language of causation. But I would also ask, to what extent is the language of produced via systemic interaction? In what way is it really different from the more kind of monocausal models that you introduced initially? I mean, it's more holistic, to be sure, and yet it's still an explanatory account, which, though not reductive on one level, could arguably be considered reductive on another level. And I would also ask, just for the sake of the theologians among us, among others, to what extent is there room in the kind of account you give for the existence of the divine? So in any event, those are just some of the questions that your talk called to mind, but let's hear what Professor Roof has to say.
So I've known Ariel since he arrived at Georgetown. In fact, I was on the search committee.
You drove me from the airport.
How pleased I am that we made the choice that we did. I also consider Ariel a really close friend, and I've never heard Ariel speak before.
The best of birthday.
I've heard you speak off the cuff. But I mean, it's a delight to hear Ariel's thoughts. And I find myself, so pleased, so interested, so impressed. And I guess, I also want to say that I'm incredibly pleased to be part of this group. I've found the past two meetings to be a group of people I really benefit from being with. And I also find it to be unlike any other academic groupings that I've been in, any other conferences, any other paper presentations, because I find it very constructive. And I'm really pleased about that. I think I have a slightly different sort of set of questions than Mark, so I'm going to totally ignore what Mark said. But maybe not. So I come at the study of religion through William James, who I like as a person. I once read, I think, a biography of, or intellectual biography of Matthew Arnold, and this guy said, I think it was Lionel Trilling, said, you don't spend your life studying somebody you hate. And so I feel this affinity toward William James, and in part it's because of his pluralism. And so what I appreciate is entertaining a variety of religious perspectives, a variety of ways of looking at religion, not to be able to choose among them, but more or less as I approach a table of food, I like to taste a lot of things. And so I kind of relate that to what you're saying about systems, because it seems as though in this great challenge, I think that we've got of like, what does it mean to be the woman at the wall or the person who's, or any of those people that you had up there? My interest is, what is it like to be a human being in all of the crazy things that we do, in all of the perfectly ordinary things that we do. And so I see your systems approach as being an attempt to take account of a lot of different aspects, a lot of different qualities, and to appreciate them. My own preference is for the idiosyncratic. I guess I'm with Nietzsche on this, that I think human beings are extremely idiosyncratic. And I'm very glad in my own adolescent-y 73-year-old way of being, I'm very glad of being idiosyncratic, and I'm very pleased when I see evidence in my students or I see evidence in scholars that they appreciate their idiosyncratic approaches, namely that they're not trying to eliminate the other approaches, but they're trying to listen to them. And especially, and I'm relating this to what was said about Kate, be surprised and hopefully disrupted by them. When I read something, when I listen to Ariel, when I listen to the other people that I've gotten to know from Georgetown, is what pleases me most, what engages me most is when I hear something I haven't heard before, and for some reason it grabs at me. So my reason for studying religion is I am totally baffled by it. And I'm not trying to solve it. I'm trying to engage with it in ways that grab at me. So I'm hoping, I mean, this is certainly true of what you wrote about pain. I certainly felt engaged with it. And I look forward to being engaged with what you're doing about systems too.
Thank you. Unlike our other speakers so far, I am not so good at extemporizing. I do not like to be surprised and disrupted. So I have everything written down, as awkward as that might be at this point, but at least my words will come out in order this way. So thank you, Ariel, for this fascinating talk. Speaking as a phenomenologist, I think that it is crucial to preserve a space for non-reductive accounts, precisely as you're doing, in order to respect what people want when they ask for an account, just as you said. An account or explanation is always at bottom a response to a question that is posed by a human being who is trying to get something done or trying to rid themselves of some perplexity. That person can only move on if they have an account or explanation that meets their problem exactly where it's at and doesn't change the subject. That the accounts that we give are beholden to people who are perplexed is illustrated perfectly at the beginning of Ariel's 2001 book, Sacred Pain, Hurting the Body for the Sake of the Soul. The text responds to a question posed by one of Ariel's friends, whom we now find out is his father, about religious people seeking out painful experiences. Why, he asks, would anyone in their right mind do that? Where that is choose to undergo pain. So consider the pilgrim. They undertake a long and arduous journey to a sacred place, suffering many hardships along the way. Why do that? Well, in one sense, the answer is obvious. The pilgrim expects to get something valuable out of the painful experience of the journey, an enhanced sense of community, a feeling of proximity to God, or even an altered state of consciousness. Whatever it is, that which they expect to get gives the suffering along the way a reflected and derived value. It makes it worth it. But I think that this solution sidesteps rather than solves the original perplexity. It is perfectly rational for the pilgrim to choose a difficult journey if it brings about the further desired goal of bringing them closer to God. We suffer all the time for the sake of goals that matter to us or to bring about results that we desire. We do this in exercising, in studying, in elective surgery, in department meetings. Instrumental suffering is part of life, and it is neither mysterious nor perplexing. To provoke the question, why would anyone in their right mind do that? The pilgrim has to appear to be out of their mind. And to answer that question, we have to either acknowledge the pilgrim's madness or explain why they appear to be irrational but are in fact not. What makes the pilgrim appear to be irrational, I suggest, is that they find the journey itself, as Ariel suggested at the end, with all its attendant suffering and hardship, to be choice-worthy. The pilgrimage is not merely a means to the end of a sacred experience. It has value in itself. The journey itself is chosen, and precisely because it is arduous. The pain is in some sense the goal. But how can pain be a goal, something that we choose for itself? The perplexity goes back to Aristotle, as all good things do. That's not in my notes. For whom we can choose only what is, or at least appears to be, good, noble, or pleasant. The bad, ignoble, and painful are not things that can be chosen. They are not intelligible objects of choice. Choosing the painful or the bad or the ignoble is a breakdown in one's faculty of choosing. One would have to be out of one's mind. If this is what makes the pilgrim appear to be irrational, then this is what the account must explain, namely how pain can be an end and not merely a means. This first criterion of success arises from the fact that explanations are beholden to the perplexities to which they respond. The second criterion follows directly from the first. If the task is to make sense of how choice can choose the painful, then the account that we give must make use of the vocabulary of choice. It must speak, as I have been doing, of choice, means, ends, goals, what is valuable, what is rational, and what is irrational. This rules out a reductive explanation. It won't do to take being in one's right mind to refer to a particular biochemical configuration, or to take pain as the object of choice to amount to one among a set of neurological states. Neither of these approaches can solve the perplexity, because neither addresses what the perplexity is about. An account that appeals to them changes the subject. But while a problem about choice must be solved using the language of choice, our faculty of choice itself is not so discriminating. It uses any and all of the vocabularies that it can get its hands on. That is, we choose things under different and multiple descriptions. And I think this is what you were reflecting in your levels of analysis. When we act, we can take as our goal particular neurological states or biochemical configurations or enhancements in our sense of community or transformations in our own selves. We can choose relationships with God, direct experiences of God, experiences that transcend the human condition entirely. We do not choose only under the headings of the good, the noble, and the pleasant. Our faculty of choice can select its objects using any one or several of our vocabularies. And that fact is the opening for interdisciplinary explanation. We have so many vocabularies in the sciences and humanities because of the complexity of the human condition. To capture that complexity, we need a lot of different ways of speaking. And I suggest when we make choices that sit near the very center of human experience, we make choices that have very complex objects. Identifying and articulating those takes all of the vocabularies at our disposal, as we've seen. These vocabularies of theology, psychology, philosophy, and others are needed to explain what it is that the pilgrim chooses. For it cannot quite be that the pilgrim chooses pain. That is not how they would put it to themselves or how they would put it to their loved ones. If this is right, then we need a multidisciplinary approach in order to understand what they choose and how it can be not only chosen as a means to a further end, but chosen also as valuable in itself. Only then, perhaps, can we understand why someone in their right mind would choose that.
Thanks. I'm keenly aware of sort of the allegory to the three pigs here. I mean, I think you've got your pad and your pen, and Tate, you've clearly built your house of stone, and I'm worried about what happens to me when the wolf comes. This is where I'm going. But thank you, Ariel, for this wonderful talk, and thank you to my new friends and colleagues, and thank you, David, for making us friends. We were colleagues, we didn't know it. Now we're friends, and that's thanks to you. So, I mean, I have a couple of reactions that arise, and one is actually related to again, thanks to David. We did a symposium at the American Psychological Association. I know if I say APA in this room, that won't be the first association. Whereas for me, that's the pond I happen to swim in. But so the American Psychological Association, which had their meeting in DC not too long ago, just a couple of months ago, we had a symposium, and I started thinking actually about this sort of question, since I knew I was presenting with a philosopher and a theologian, what it is that we look for when we look for answers, right? We're all scholars and we're looking for answers. So what does that mean? And your framing, in terms of a frame of reference, I think is apt. One of the things that sort of emerged in that symposium, that at least I was thinking when I gave the talk that I gave there, was about the differences in meaningful explanation, right? But particularly, you frame it as why, and people want to know why, and why do the magnets attract each other? But it occurs to me that why isn't always why. Sometimes, and for some people, what they mean by why is how. Right. And so that this notion, as we are gathered and we are from different disciplines, I think it occurs to me more and more that some of us are looking for reasons and some of us are looking for mechanisms. And I'm not sure that, and just to sort of echo Kate's point, one of the things I think we're confronted with in this dialogue that David has created, is whether and when it might even be meaningful to give a reason to a person who's looking for a mechanism, or a mechanism to a person who's looking for a reason to, where is there value in changing the subject, right? And I still don't know if I know the answer to that question. But I think, I think it has helped me, if nothing else, to clarify where the divides might be, and what the nature of those divides might be. in a very mechanistic way because I'm a how person, I want there to be a mechanism and then I can go home and sleep, right? And even this is something I was thinking about with the sort of information theoretic, the system theoretic informational feedback, feed forward type of structure that you're presenting. I still think ultimately, and I wonder because I'm a fan of Feynman's as well. I wonder if Feynman might wonder, like, still that entire system ultimately has to be understood within a frame of reference by each observer, right? And so then, even if you construct a system theoretic rendering, right? Ultimately, you may not get around the need of the observer, right? To the necessity of the observer to digest it within their frame of reference. And so just things that came to mind. But on the topic of pain in particular, and being the brain guy on the podium, I suppose I'm supposed to say something about the brain. But it's interesting, and in particular, phantom pain. I think the account that essentially what's happening is you have areas of your somatosensory cortex, the part of the brain where sensation actually manifests, right? You don't need an arm to feel pain. You can just stimulate somatosensory cortex and feel the arm. The arm turns out to be somewhat epiphenomenal to actual pain. But if you if you look at what's happening there, you've lost your arm. So the neurons then that are built to receive information from your arm, well, they're not there. So then neurons that are built to receive information from your cheek, which actually happens to live right next to your hand, actually, on the somatosensory cortex, they get greedy. In fact, the nature of neurons is to compete with each other. And as long as they're all healthy, the balance works. But if something stops getting input, then its neighbors take over its real estate. And so what happens then, right, is exactly what you're saying, which is that there's something higher, right? The higher order, the sort of, and that's how all systems, sensory systems in the brain, there's like the immediate, and then there's the higher level that reads it, right? That what comes in from your body. So that higher level, right, is reading now from your cheek, right? But it's built to interpret that as coming from your hand. And so you've got this feeling of handness, right, when something touches your cheek. And what's interesting to me about that in the context of pain that people would choose is what we've learned about the essentially identical nature of physical and emotional pain in the brain. That nociception, the systems by which you feel pain in your body are highly overlapping, right, with the systems by which you feel pain when you've been rejected, when you've lost someone that you love. These sorts of deeply painful experiences. And what it makes me wonder, and this is just me wondering, right? But it hadn't occurred to me until hearing from you, is this notion that's very salient right now at Halloween, because I've got little kids and I take them trick-or-treating, and it is endlessly just infuriating to me that I've got my 4-year-old who wants to hop around as a rabbit, right? And I'm going to the house of a person who's showing scenes from like evil horror movies on the wall of their house, right? And I'm puzzled where it is that this need to be scared comes from, this fear that we impose on ourselves, right? And the explanation commonly for that is, well, it's a movie. And so I know it's a movie, and that makes it a more pleasant experience because the stakes are much lower, right? And so then I can come to, in some ways, deal with fear because I can practice it at this lower level, right? So where I'm going with all of this is that it occurs to me that it's possible that choosing to feel pain in the body, right? Pain we feel in the body, it hurts a lot, but it's actually lower stakes than the pain that we feel when the pain is from our life, is from a truth or a reality or a loss in our life. And I just wonder if the higher up system that reads the pain or that reads the fear in a horror movie, right, might come to be inured, might come to be better practiced, might come to be strengthened at lower stakes, right, by experiencing pain in the body, and therefore better able to deal with the pain that's really scary, which is the pain from truth and from life. So just those are thoughts.
Yeah. Wonderful questions. What should I do? Should I respond? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm good. So the first question, the theological question, I started out as a phenomenologist as well. So I wasn't interested as a researcher, either in the existence of metaphysical entities like a god, or in the material workings of a brain. I was interested in the play of human consciousness for many years. And I still really completely bracket all things theological, okay? But what I am interested in is how the play of human consciousness can produce, one, the conception of the divine. This is such a narcissistic entity, that divine. And two, a whole world of commitment to that divine. So I can't really answer the theological question at all. I do have to confess that in recent years, I have abandoned the phenomenological route and started getting interested more in evolutionary and functional accounts, functionalistic accounts of religion. In other words, how does religion function in the evolution of culture, in the evolution of societies, in the evolution of humans? Okay, and the pleasure book is very much about that. The pain book was not about that at all. So I'm not really committed to. If you look at the books that I've written, they're all different. I play. Basically, my scholarly life has been play, games. Something grabs me and I go with it because it interests me. And then the next thing that grabs me and interests me will be the next thing that I do. If I'm going to commit myself to 4 years of doing research on a project, it has to be something that's fun. Okay. And so I don't have a consistent trajectory in my so I switch for the pleasure of it. And so in terms of the Kate, basically, it was a wonderful paraphrase, sophisticated paraphrase of my meandering presentation, I thought. That is exactly what this conception is. That is to say, gather all the elements that interact in the full complexity of a person's life where choice is central. And that's possibly something that a neuropsychologist might argue against. The choice involves conscious choice, a certain level of intentionality predicated on freedom of choice, which to many scientists is non-existent. So if you're aware of having chosen something, but you're not aware that the reason you chose it is because it pisses off your dad, okay, then what kind of a choice is that? So you have to unpack choice, put choice itself under the microscope and see what it is that goes into it. And that's a playful thing to do, but it's also a very fruitful thing to do. On the subject of pain, here's something interesting about pain. It's called the paradox of pain. So try to imagine two football players towards at the very end of the fourth quarter, and the quarterback throws into the end zone, okay? The receiver and the defender both jump for it, coming from opposite direction and crashing in the air, both of them falling to the ground and suffering exactly the same physical trauma, but it was intercepted. So the defender bounces up, does not feel the pain, the attacker is lying on the ground groaning in pain. Okay, that's called the paradox of pain. That is to say that pain isn't just in the body, pain is in the mind. Yes, there's a certain kind of influence of what intentionality, value, goals achieved or goals not achieved define how you experience your pain, right? And so that's something that popped into my head when you were talking about pain. I've often been asked, what's the difference between pain and suffering? Okay, are they the same thing? In Sacred Pain, there's a story of a 14th century nun who spent her whole adult life hurting herself. So she in the winter, she slept on stones, on cold stones, almost naked. She had thistles and branches in a pile that she would jump into and roll in it to hurt herself. But then she got sick. And she never stopped complaining about how it hurt. In fact, it was demonic torture for her. So what's the difference? The difference is, one, choice versus no choice, but also the interpretation of what the how is functioning. Okay. The how of the disease was not something, it was an alien force, hence demonic. The rolling in the thistles and branches was her choice. Therefore, it's God directed. Okay. And you see there the difference between suffering and pain. Okay. It hurt. Both of them hurt. But one was suffering, the other one was just pain, valued pain. So.
There's some questions from the audience if you have them, please.
Thanks very much. I'm grateful to all of you for these fascinating reflections on religious experience from different disciplines. I'm a scholar of religion myself from across town, Catholic University, and an ethicist. And I wanted to expand a little bit on something that Ariel just said, which was that it can be useful to kind of deconstruct the notion of choice. Because what I'm wondering is whether there are additional spaces where we can frame the question of what is going on in religious experience that don't view it either as an application of what Kate called the faculty of choice. In other words, something that is purposive experience, that is either intentional or in some way motivated, nor something that is the product of a mechanism, something that we can simply apply an explanatory framework to. Because I can't document this very well at the moment, but I've certainly heard accounts of religious experience that present it as something that is not necessarily willed, as something that is also not something that can easily be accounted to as a subconscious reaction or some other psychological process, but something that is called out of a person. I just wonder if you've thought about any additional ways of framing this question of religious experience that go beyond the language of choice or a kind of explanatory account. And I guess the language of hermeneutics can be helpful here, the language of interpretation, but I don't know if that's even the right framework. Any thoughts?
Well, if you read Ann Taves's work, according to her, religious experience is an attribution to some other kind of experience. So imagine that you go to a church for services. This is out of William James, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. And you hear a sermon like you do every Sunday, and then you go back home. Then next morning you wake up and you have, like me, high fever, or maybe it's not high fever, but a feeling of lightheadedness and some other kind of unusual occurrences in your body and in the room where you are. Then you attribute that to perhaps to the sermon that you heard the day before, and therefore you then regard that as a religious experience. In other words, to call anything intrinsically religious is to ignore that attributional aspect of what is always going on. Okay. The emphasis is on experience. Obviously, a lot of religion is not experience, right? If you're opening the book of Psalms, that's a religious text, right? You can be reading it in a class on Hebrew biblical literature where there is no religious experience whatsoever. It's just a text, right? Or somebody could read Psalm 119, which, by the way, is extremely long. When I was growing up in Israel, they punished us by making us memorize it. So I have a kind of a non-fond attribution as far as that goes. It's not religious, it's demonic. But anyway, so that's another way of considering that there's no intrinsic religious experience. There are all kinds of religious texts, there's religious locations, there's centers of worship and so forth, but the experience itself is always attributional. So that's another way to consider it. And what it is that you are attributing can be entirely different from one case to another. It could be a fever, it could be euphoria, it could be depression, it could be any number of things that you're feeling, okay, that you're connecting with something else, which is what attribution is.
If I can just add a word or two. I mean, for some thinkers about religious experience, it actually would be defined as having to do with the abeyance of will, right? So, you know, what are one of William James's 4 characters of mystical experience? One of them he calls passivity. And the idea of passivity is that such experiences are often undergone, wherein a person experiences themselves as being seized from without by something exterior to them. And other thinkers also have developed a related line of thinking. David had mentioned Simone Weil. Simone Weil talks a lot about the idea of obedience. And, you know, that's a language that sits uncomfortable with a lot of people, partly because it seems to, you know, run roughshod over will and so forth, but because it sounds kind of too tied to authority. But the idea of giving oneself over to what is other is key. Iris Murdoch, in turn, we talked about her a little bit over dinner tonight, also talks about the idea of necessity in a similar way. And, you know, Peter and some others in the room can probably speak more about this. You know, Marion, when he talks about givenness, and when he talks about saturated phenomena, you know, those have to do with being constituted by what is other, rather than seeing the I as the constituting, deciding will. So I would say not only is there ample room for moving in a somewhat different direction than will, with all due respect, but, you know, for some people, that would be more definitive of religious experience.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. I want to pursue some of the things you're discussing and maybe problematize something for any of the 4 or 5 of you. A couple of people have brought up William James and speaking phenomenologically about the necessity of looking at these questions from multiple different perspectives to try and triangulate, as it were, the experience we're trying to talk about. I love doing James's squirrel around the tree example with my students, right? For those who are unfamiliar, James has this question that he'd ask his friends, imagine you're in front of a tree and there's a squirrel on the other side, and you're very keen to see this squirrel. And so you try to run around the tree to see the squirrel, but the squirrel's got some mad ninja skills and he always stays on the exact opposite side of the tree from where you are. So say you get really frustrated, you're going left, right, and finally you just run around the tree 5 times really quickly. And so James asks, did you run around the squirrel? And his answer is, well, it depends on what you mean by went around. If you meant, did you go to the squirrel's stomach, left, back, and right, then no, you did not go around the squirrel because its belly was to you the entire time. But if you meant, were you north, south, east, or west of the squirrel, then you went around the squirrel because you went around the entire tree. And so this question of religious experience, here's how this relates. With respect, I'm a little skeptical that we can get to the experience of what it's like to be the woman at the Wailing Wall or the pilgrim in the Ganges if we're looking at them sociologically, or if we're looking to explain the how. Those are really important questions, and I think they're valid, but they're certainly not the way that those two people experience it, right? Any more than people falling in love experience it as a sort of elevated dopamine, or I don't know the brain, but whatever that would be, right? I had lunch one time with Paul and Patricia Churchland down in San Diego, who were a very loving couple. And although they're eliminative materialists in a neurobiological sense, they certainly don't inhabit the world as eliminative materialists. That's not what their relationship looked like to me. And so I just wonder what all 5 of you think about the possibility. Well, I'm not sure how to put this, right? I think phenomenologically is probably, from my perspective, limited, biased, all those other sorts of things, the most fruitful way to think about someone else's religious experience. I'm not Jewish, but if I'm going to think about what it's like to be at the Wailing Wall, I'm not sure how useful it is for me to think about history or religion in a historical sense, or biology, as it is the sort of lived and felt experience of what it's like to be in that position. So
I think the first thing is, the question is, what exactly do you want to know about what it's like to be her, right? That question, what it's like to be her, can mean several things, right? Some of those could be answered through sociological. Some of them could be answered through seeing what prayer she's uttering, her family history. Those are all different answers to elements or moments of what it's like to be her. And it depends on who's asking the question and what exactly they want to know. So I'm standing next to her, or somebody like her, with my baby here, and I'm watching people like her. And I'm living in Jerusalem, and which is the holiest place for Jews, at the holiest place in Jerusalem for Jews. And I'm thinking, I wonder when Natalie's going to need to be fed. Okay. In other words, I'm completely estranged, but I'm asking a question about her. Okay. How is she different? How essentially is she different from what I am in exactly the same spot? But you have to be able to define what it is that you want to know. The system theory that I have there is very partial. I didn't really touch on sociological or a family theory elements or any other number. And the totality, I think what you're saying is the totality is never it, that there is ultimately that gap that is unbridgeable, that you can't know what it's like to be her. I wonder if she knows what it's like to be her, fully speaking. Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
In the end, is it that all we can have are phenomenological? So, I mean, one of the things James does, he uses account after account after, where he's essentially asking questions, what it's like to be, this thing, in this religious or spiritual, and at the end, what does all of this phenomenology add up? Are we in a position at all to address the larger issue of whether there exist energies outside the perimeter of the cell that all these people are talking about? Or must we remain in the agnostic and simply gather the good data and cherish the account? And so, he very cautiously towards the end of the book says, I don't know. But everything I know about human experience and about what these people told me leads me to think perhaps that maybe a truly naturalist account of the human being would be sufficient. And that there might be something other. Are you interested in that move, or is that where philosophy becomes theology and let's not go there? And I think it's true that we probably, well, certainly I think we really know what.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I just feel like certain ways of acting. So. Only had 2 breaks tonight. Far I want to go with that, but like it's I wonder if we're limited in asking questions about what it's like to be religious if we're not. What it's like to be in love if we're not in love. It's not that that's a limiting factor, but yeah, I've done a lot of work on the ways that narrative can get us to have it the experience of other people. Right. So I can experience, for example, what it's like to be a woman in our society and to deal with misogyny and I can never experience that because I'm not in the body and I haven't had that body experience in the world. I can have a sort of as if insight into it if I read a well-written story well. But I think it's pretty clear the further we get from the experience of another type of being, the harder it is to have that real insight, right? I've got greater insight into women here because we share a language, they can tell the stories that I do into the experience of a orca or a salmon. It gets further and further away. And I think even within the kind of experience that we're talking about, difficult to judge from the outside without that becoming the first question I said, what is she like? And what it's like to be her? What's like to be her requires kind of an empathy like her that is challenged by the distance between my experience. No, go ahead.
I just have to say that the choice of pain in religious life was supposed to simplify it, because pain is, I think, the most embodied of religious experiences, which is also cultural. Pain is a cultural fact. It's not just a medical or a biological fact. It's, in a sense, it's where culture and biology meet in our embodied experience. So I thought it would be, and you can see how difficult even that is. Imagine that what we're looking at is what would be a complicated example, really anything else in religion, a congregation praying together. What's going on? Matt, you can imagine.
I know we have to end soon, but do any of you want to respond to the latest volley of ideas? Can you give us a couple of minutes, David?
I just had one small thought, right? I don't know if this is relevant or not, but even just the language of the question, which I think is what you're getting at. So there's like what it's like, to be a person, but even that seems to confuse it, right? Because isn't it what it is to be the person instead of what it's like to be the person? That might not help advance the issue at all.
Have sort of judgments we make from biology, about biology, about social things. When we ask the question, what is all we approach patent product? It seems to be a different question. Right, and there are some ways of studying things where you're looking at it from the outside as a and there are other ways of studying things where you're seeing to get inside, which I've done down. In part for all mystery.
Really glad that you brought it up. Because I've been playing recently with the importance of understanding in psychoanalysis. Because everybody that writes about psychoanalysis privileges the word understanding. How do we understand what's going on with this person? And to me, what's most important about psychoanalysis or any encounter with a person or with ourselves is the failures in understanding. I really love the failures in understanding because, as far as narrative or anything else can bring us, there's something presumptuous about how far those get us that needs to be chastened by an awareness of their failure. And so that experience of failure is I don't know, I experience it as being especially valuable, not as an end, not like, oh, I give up, I fail, but as an awareness that there's always more.
Thank you.
Let's thank Ariel and the panel.
Thank you.